You're sitting in a half-empty mountain lodge, high in the Pyrenees, where the wind scratches the windows like a polite ghost asking to come in. The logs in the fireplace hiss and pop, and a waiter shuffles between tables with a practiced silence. You look over, and there he is. Yes, him, the man they now call the vanishing billionaire. He's alone at a corner table, hunched slightly, scribbling something on a napkin with a gold fountain pen. You don't even realize you're watching him until he folds the napkin neatly, presses it beneath his empty glass, stands without a word, and walks out into the snow. No coat, no bag, no phone. That was 3 years ago, and nobody has seen him since. Honestly, when I first read this story, I had to pause and just sit with it for a while. Something about the quiet absurdity of it. The sheer confidence it takes to vanish in an age of satellites and cell towers, it gave me chills. I mean, a billionaire just disappears, leaving behind nothing but one final sentence. If this kind of story hits you like it hit me, consider subscribing, and hey, leave a comment telling me where you're listening from, or just say hi. I read them all, even the ones that say, fell asleep in 3 minutes, great stuff. All right, now let's slow things down and step into tonight's journey together. The napkin itself became an instant relic, not because of what it was standard paper, slightly crumpled, nothing exotic, but because of what it said. One sentence, written in perfect calligraphy. To know where I've gone, you must forget where I've been. That's it. That's the whole mystery. No coordinates, no riddle, no dramatic goodbye. Just a challenge wrapped in paradox. It felt like a riddle you weren't supposed to solve, not logically. Anyway, and yet, thousands of people tried, are still trying. You tuck your scarf tighter around your neck. Even imagining the scene makes you feel colder. The man's name was Marinvell, not a household name. But maybe that's exactly how he wanted it. While other billionaires played social media games, or built electric cars or rockets, Marin avoided all spotlights. He was never seen at Davos. He never gave TED Talks, didn't even have a public biography on his company's website. Yet his net worth was estimated conservatively at around $46 billion, and no one could really explain how. He wasn't one of those eccentric rich guys who inherited steel fortunes or sold a photo-sharing app for $1 trillion. Marinvell seemed to accumulate wealth the way trees gather moss, slowly, quietly, and only noticeable when you step back far enough. He once owned 6 banks, a rare earth mineral monopoly, and a failing paper company that, for no clear reason, suddenly began printing the currency of 3 small countries. Historians still argue whether his financial holdings were entirely legal or even traceable. The lodge where he vanished was real, though tucked on a cliffside, reachable only by foot or snowcat during the winter months. He'd booked the place under a pseudonym he often used, James Thornsby, which sounds like someone who writes novels about people who solve crimes in sweaters. Staff remember him as charming but quiet, a good tipper who ate boiled eggs for breakfast and spent long hours staring at the mountains. His room was found untouched. No luggage, no signs of struggle, just that napkin, left behind in the restaurant. Like a final breadcrumb, you rub your thumb over the invisible ink of the memory, wondering what would compel someone to vanish like that, not escape, not accident, but vanish, with style. And this wasn't his first disappearance. Back in the early 2000s, Vell had vanished once before, briefly. He went offline for 8 weeks during the Enron collapse, leading some to speculate he'd shorted the company so hard he triggered a mini economic quake. When he resurfaced, it was in a private meeting with a former U.S. Treasury Secretary. What they discussed has never been made public, but one quote from that meeting was leaked. He didn't ask for permission. He asked what came next, a classic Vel-ism. People say he collected unusual things, not watches or yachts or Picasso paintings. He collected questions. He kept a small, leather-bound notebook titled Unsolved. Inside were handwritten entries like who made the Voynich manuscript, and why do cats purr when dying, and what happened to Flight 19. His favorite, what do you become when no one knows who you are anymore? That one was underlined. The lodge where he disappeared is now somewhat of a shrine. Journalists visit in vain. Cryptography students take sabbaticals to study the napkin sentence. And spiritual types claim he reached some sort of enlightenment and ascended into a higher dimension. One visitor even tried to lick the napkin for clues. The lodge owner had to ask him to leave. There's a quiet comfort in this kind of mystery. Isn't there in a world where everything is explained, GPS tagged, and endlessly commented upon? Someone like Marin Vel feels like a ghost slipping out the back door of the internet, a reminder that life still contains pockets of unsolved wonder and maybe a hint of madness. Your fingers trace the sentence again in your mind. To know where I've gone, you must forget where I've been. What does that even mean? Is it a metaphor, a misdirection, a map, or something worse, something true? Some say the sentence is a reference to memory palaces, the ancient technique used by Greek orators to store vast amounts of information. You walk mentally through a familiar place and deposit knowledge in imagined rooms. If Marin built a memory palace, what happens when you burn it down? Others claim it's a psychological key. That, by intentionally forgetting the known facts of his life, a new pattern would emerge. One online forum attempted this by erasing every documented event from Marin's timeline and rebuilding it based only on secondhand rumors. The result? A strange, dreamlike path that placed him at the 2012 London Olympics, a silent investor in a lost Soviet space project, and possibly, the man who taught a dolphin how to mimic English vowels in the 1970s. That last part was almost definitely fake. Probably. But who knows anymore? You close your eyes, and for a moment, you're sitting across from him. Marin Vel, his face calm, his eyes not exactly kind, but curious. A man not trying to be admired, but understood. Then he smiles, rises from his chair, and steps out into the snow. And just like that, he's gone. But you're not ready to leave yet, because where he went is still very much in play. And if you want to follow him, you'll have to understand who he really was. Before the sentence, before the lodge, before everything went quiet, you step back. Way back before the napkin, before the mountains, before his name even mattered. The world isn't quite as digital yet, and Marin Vel is just a tall, awkward man in wire-rimmed glasses, walking into a room where no one knows his name, but everyone soon will. Because this isn't a story of money found, it's a story of influence earned and shadow worn like silk. It starts in the late 80s, where you can almost hear the synth music bleeding through the timeline. Vel's first major appearance is unannounced. He's at a low-lit dinner in Vienna, full of government advisors and economic thinkers. not invited. He just shows up, orders wine, says nothing, listens like he's memorizing every fork clink. By dessert, he's asking pointed questions, not big ones, targeted ones. What's the Swiss backup plan if the franc crashes? Why does Algeria lease communication satellites from Italy? The kind of questions that imply you already know the answers, and you're just checking to see if they do. 2. By the end of the night, 3 men hand him business cards. One of them will later chair a World Bank committee. The second will be arrested for insider trading. The third will mysteriously vanish off the coast of Corsica. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. You notice a pattern forming. Vell doesn't just climb ladders. He builds the buildings around them. He creates shell companies, and then builds shell governments around those. He doesn't just own a tech firm. He buys the lithium mine, the port that ships it, and the lobbying firm that decides how it's taxed. It's like watching someone play chess with invisible pieces, and somehow they always win. Sometimes they win by not even playing. A mainstream historical fact for grounding, all right. In 1993, when NAFTA was signed, Vell made a fortune not by investing in U.S. firms or Mexican manufacturing, but by quietly acquiring a fleet of obsolete Canadian transport trucks. He saw that cross-border shipping would skyrocket and retrofitted the trucks for customs compliance before the ink on the treaty dried. That's the kind of foresight we're talking about. But don't be fooled. Vell wasn't just a capitalist machine. He was also weird. He reportedly hated round tables, believed they made people lie more. He insisted on 12-sided ones, like a ritual gone corporate. He disliked the smell of citrus, found it too absolute. He wrote notes exclusively with fountain pens filled with iron gall ink, a medieval recipe once used to script the Magna Carta. In one particularly strange business negotiation, he demanded to be seated between 2 clocks, one set to local time, the other set to Xenotime. When asked what that meant, he reportedly smiled and said, "It only ticks when something matters." Historians still argue whether that was literal, metaphorical, or if the clock was some kind of quantum device he invented on a dare. Emotionally, he was elusive, not cold, just unreadable. A former assistant described it like this: working for him was like serving tea to a ghost. He thanked you, smiled, but somehow you felt like you were being haunted. You start to piece it together. Marin didn't seek power. He curated it, like a museum. He never overexposed himself, never held official titles. He was what political theorists call a kingmaker, the one behind the ones in power. A fringe tidbit, here's one. In the mid-2000s, a leaked memo from a Southeast Asian defense ministry listed MV as an external voice of concern in missile development negotiations. No one knew who MV was until someone found a receipt paid in gold bullion to a remote research facility near the Indian Ocean. The sender, MV Trust. Some believe Marin might have privately funded a weather control prototype. Why? Maybe he just wanted it to rain on Tuesdays. Maybe he didn't like umbrellas. You watch as he slides, almost frictionless, through eras and industries. He invests early in fiber optics, but never touches the internet. Owns land near rocket launch sites, but never tweets about space. He even donates anonymously to an opera house that only performs pieces written before 1820. Everything about him is both purposeful and perverse. The emotional beat you feel comes in a quiet moment. Somewhere in 2011, when he visits a forgotten town in Poland where his grandparents once lived, he stays one night, leaves flowers on a grave that has no name. He speaks to no one, but the next week, The town gets funding for a new library donated anonymously. It's easy to forget that under the towering intellect and shifting shadows, there was still a person who walked through cemeteries alone. The scholarly debate. Some say he was a financial savant. Others believe he was just unusually lucky. But a growing camp argues that Vell was something else entirely, a person who understood systems better than the people who built them. Not because he hacked them, but because he listened to them, like systems whispered to him at night, sharing their secrets in exchange for silence. And now, you're starting to wonder, did Marin vanish because he wanted to, or because he'd finally solved something dangerous? You press your fingers to your temples, trying to hold on to the shape of the thought, but it's slippery, like soap in the bath. You know, the one that somehow shoots halfway across the room, and now you're standing there wet and philosophical. The truth is, by the time Marin Vell walked into that lodge, he'd already vanished 1,000 times in plain sight. One name on a deed here, a voice on a call there, a whisper behind a law that never made the news. And yet, the most powerful thing he ever did wasn't a merger or a manipulation. It was this: he wrote a single sentence and walked out into the snow, leaving the world with a question no one's been able to answer. Not fully. Not yet. But maybe there are more clues, buried not in where he went, but in what he loved. You take a breath. It's time to enter his world of velvet, volcanoes, and vaults. And trust me, it only gets stranger from here. You're inside a room that smells like aged paper and faint incense myrrh. Maybe. Or something even older. The light is soft, filtered through scarlet velvet curtains, and the carpet beneath your feet muffles every step, like you're walking through memory foam soaked in secrets. Welcome to one of Marin Vell's private libraries. One of many. This one's in Morocco. Though its location is still disputed, it doesn't show up on satellite images, and the locals speak of it only in half smiles and shoulder shrugs. The walls are lined floor to ceiling with books, but not the kind you find in airports or college dorms. These are bound in sharkskin, bark, copper plates. The spines are handwritten. Some even pulse slightly, as though breathing with age. In the center of the room is a desk made of petrified wood, polished to a mirror finish, on which rests a volcanic rock. It's warm to the touch, yes. Marin collected strange things, but not for display. Never that. No Instagram reels. No Billionaire show and tell. He surrounded himself with sensory puzzles. Rooms like riddles. Objects as questions. Take his Iceland vault, for instance. Nestled deep inside, a cooled lava tube. Yes. Inside a volcano is a chamber sealed by both biometric data and a 6-line Norse poem. No one's ever gotten inside. At least, no one who's talked about it. The vault's entrance is marked by a brass plaque that reads simply, "A thing unopened is still a thing understood." Creepy a bit. Poetic definitely. Useful hard to say. Historians still argue whether the vault exists at all, or if it's a clever legend Marin seeded himself to protect something else. Either way, hikers report feeling uneasy near the supposed site. One described a sensation like the air pressing back, as if they'd stepped into the path of a thought too large to finish. But it wasn't just dark strangeness. Marin was deeply tactile. He believed the world was better experienced through fingers and smells than numbers and screens. He famously commissioned a line of custom fragrances. Each was inspired by a memory real or imagined. Fog over Bombay, 1937. wool. After rain, the inside of a church bell. No two bottles were ever the same. He gave them as gifts to people he wanted to remember something they'd forgotten. The perfume lab was hidden behind a false wall in a defunct Berlin watch shop. To enter, you had to press a specific sequence on an antique pocket watch embedded in the wall. The code 4 ticks forward, 2 back, a musical time signature, and then there were the velvet rooms. Vel believed velvet absorbed secrets. He once said, "A whisper into velvet stays whispered." In his homes, and there were many, each had at least one room entirely upholstered in velvet. Floor, ceiling, even the doorknob. In these rooms, he'd conduct his most confidential meetings. Phones banned, windows sealed. The room smelled faintly of pine and salt. One guest, a diplomat who'd later become a UN special envoy, described sitting in that space as like being inside the quiet part of someone else's brain. Sensory detail matters here. You can feel the plush velvet brushing your fingers. You can hear the silence, deep and warm, like the pause after a confession. And through it all, Marin left breadcrumbs, not to be followed, but noticed, the way you might notice a pattern in the moss on a wall, or the rhythm in a train's wheels that feels like it's spelling something just for you. One especially odd example, he owned a piano that played no sound. The keys depressed, the hammers struck, but nothing. He called it the practice of thought. He'd sit for hours, silently playing pieces that only he could hear. A former housekeeper once caught him doing this at sunrise, shirtless, covered in ash. She never spoke of it again. Who would you even tell? A mainstream historical fact. Okay, during the Cold War, certain libraries in Eastern Europe maintained dark stacks, rooms of forbidden books, accessible only to special scholars with clearance. Marin was one of the few Westerners ever granted access. What did he read? No one knows. But afterward, he began building libraries of his own in every continent except Australia. Why not Australia? Who knows? Maybe the velvet didn't sit well in the humidity. The fringe tidbit, Marin once reportedly financed a psychic, not for fun, but as an experiment, for 3 years. He gave her room, board, and a monthly salary to sit in a soundproofed room and simply think about him. Every day, for 8 hours, she wrote nothing down. She just sat, and when asked why, he replied, "I want to see if the mind alone can leave fingerprints." What's emotionally immersive is this: one of his estates in Tuscany contained a perfectly preserved replica of his childhood bedroom, right down to the cartoon wallpaper, the cracked lamp, the stack of obsolete toy catalogs. But the real kicker, it was built underground, a full 20 feet below the estate, accessible only by elevator. No signs, no instructions. Why recreate a room from memory, then bury it in darkness? That question still lingers, and perhaps it brings us closer to the core of Marin Vel's thinking, that secrets should not just be kept, but crafted. That hiding something isn't enough, you have to make its very existence feel like myth. Which brings us back to the napkin. To know where I've gone, you must forget where I've been. Maybe that's not a sentence. Maybe it's an instruction, a challenge to strip away everything you know about him until what's left is the thing he never spoke aloud. You pause, listening. The library seems to breathe behind you, and then something strange. One of the books on the wall, bound in rust-colored velvet slides, half an inch out of place, as if nudged from behind. Your hand twitches. Do you reach for it? Of course you do, but we'll open it together. Next time. The velvet book slides out smoothly, quieter than you expect. It's heavier, too denser, as though it holds not just words but weight, not metaphorical weight, like gravity. You rest it on a table that wasn't there a moment ago. The air changes when it opens cooler, sharper, like stepping into a crypt lined with secrets no one has dared to say aloud in centuries. Inside, no title page, just columns of tiny, careful handwriting. So neat, it's almost inhuman. Latin, no, not quite. Some lines feel like recipes, others math. There are diagrams of shapes that seem to shift when you look too long. And in the margin of the 14th page, a note in Marin's unmistakable hand, the same cursive used on that napkin. Only those who forget the architect can see the door. You lean back, the room spinning slightly. You're beginning to realize something. This isn't just a man who disappeared. This is a man who disappeared intentionally, ritually, philosophically. Marin Vell didn't vanish by accident. He orchestrated it. Let's rewind to the years before the sentence. The ones no one talks about. He'd already liquidated most of his known companies on paper. At least. Holdings dissolved, foundations merged, properties transferred to anonymous trusts, named after obscure celestial bodies. His face stopped appearing in press photos, and somewhere around 2017, even his voice went quiet. No interviews, no speeches. Just a man shrinking backwards through the spotlight until it no longer reached him. But, and this is key, he wasn't hiding out. He was performing his own erasure. Historians still argue whether this was a retreat, an exit strategy, or some kind of art. Yes, art. Because what he did next was almost cinematic. He built a series of installations, not museums, not galleries experiences, 8 of them, scattered across the globe, each only open for 1 week, each invitation only, each utterly surreal. The first was a house in the Arctic Circle, made entirely of black glass, no doors. The guests were dropped in by helicopter through a skylight. Inside, the house simulated an endless sunset. Every window showed a sky locked in amber glow. No clocks, no signals. The guests were told only one thing: remain still until the hour turns. But the hour never turned. They spent 4 days like that, eating, whispering, sleeping on velvet mats. Some swore they heard a piano playing beneath the floorboards. Others saw words form in their condensation on the windows. When they were retrieved, they were given sealed envelopes. Inside each, a quote, handwritten in ink that smelled faintly of almonds. None of the quotes matched. One guest's read, "Even the silence has roots." Another said, "When the mind forgets, the body remembers." The mainstream historical fact here. In 2018, a global study of human perception found that extended exposure to unchanging light cycles can alter memory function and emotion regulation. Vell was ahead of it. He didn't just know the science, he applied it like paint. Fringe tidbit. At the 4th installation in a monastery in the ruins of Petra, attendees were given masks and forbidden to speak for 72 hours. On the 3rd night, someone claimed to have seen Marin, just standing at the edge of the courtyard, watching. Was it really him? A hired actor? A hallucination born from silence? The photo snapped was too blurry to prove anything, but something about the shape of the shoulders, the way he stood, weight on the left leg like always. It made people believe, and yet he left no fingerprints, literally. The artifacts and furniture in each installation were cleaned with an experimental polymer that removed not just oils, but microscopic residue patterns used only in high-level space missions. No trace of him, just ideas, impressions, scent, mood. You start to get it now. These weren't installations. They were mirrors, each one reflecting back a different piece of the man who was erasing himself. Emotionally, the most intimate of them all was the seventh a hotel room in Tokyo, booked under the name Ko Izanami, which loosely translates to Last God Returns. The room was set to exactly 1972 Tokyo decor. Vinyl on the shelves, a rotary phone that rang once at 3:17 a.m., then never again. Inside the nightstand drawer, a single cassette tape, the label for the version of me that stayed when played. It contained no music, just 58 minutes of ocean waves. Then at the end, a whisper, just one word, begin. People cried. You see how layered this is? Marin didn't just vanish. He scattered versions of himself like constellations across the earth, then dimmed each star slowly, methodically. You remember how we mentioned his childhood bedroom in Tuscany turns out. One of the installations, there were 6, was an exact replica of that replica, a copy of a copy, with one key difference. In this one, there was a second bed, slightly smaller, untouched. On the pillow, a photo of a boy no one could identify. No guest dared move it. And this is where the emotional unease settles in, because now you're not sure if Marin vanished from the world or from himself. You wonder, was the sentence on the napkin a final act of defiance or surrender? And here comes the cliffhanger. Are you ready? Because we're not done with his final day yet. There's still the matter of the box he left at the lodge, the one marked only with a spiral and the year 1989. And trust me, what's inside that box might not just change how you see Marinville. It might change how you see yourself. You stand in front of the box now, heavy oak, darker than time, carved with a spiral that seems to move when you look too long. Not literally, of course, or maybe literally, depending on how sleep-deprived you are. It was left at the lodge desk with no explanation, no note, no sender, just that curling, hypnotic spiral, and 1 year etched in brass, 1989. The year is a clue, obviously. You think back? What was Marin doing in 1989? What was the world doing? Berlin Wall falling, Tiananmen Square, the Voyager 2 flyby of Neptune. Seinfeld aired its pilot, and somewhere among those global jolts and subtle beginnings, Marinville turned 27 and vanished for 3 months, his first major disappearance. No press release, no sabbatical statement, just gone. When he reappeared, he had a scar down his left side and no memory, so he claimed of where he'd been. People laughed it off. Classic Marin, they said. Always dramatic, but in light of the box, you're beginning to think maybe he wasn't being dramatic. Maybe he was being honest. Your fingers tremble as you lift the lid. Inside, not gold, not diamonds, nothing flashy. Just a cassette player, analog, scratched, well-loved, and one tape, unlabeled, tucked neatly inside. Next to it, a stack of 6 Polaroids, rubber banded together, and a letter. Let's start with the photos. They show a boy standing in front of a diner, wind-blown hair, a red bicycle, a forest path, in winter, bare branches. One gloved hand reaching into frame. A blurry shot of Marin, much younger, Maybe 16 caught mid-laugh beside a rusted truck, a strange doorway in a hillside, clearly old, moss-covered, barely visible, a woman's face in profile, smiling. But the smile doesn't reach her eyes. The last just sky, a swirl of storm cloud, spiral-shaped. These aren't vacation photos. They're memory totems. You can feel it in your chest, some ancient tug. And the letter just one sentence, handwritten. Play this only if you've truly forgotten me. Well, you hesitate. Then hit play. The tape hisses softly. The analog crackle like fire. And then you hear it. Marin's voice. Quiet. Tired. If you're hearing this, I've succeeded. Or I've failed. I'm not sure anymore. Either way. This message isn't about where I've gone. It's about where you can't follow. You pause. Goosebumps rise like tiny sentinels. He continues. Back in 1989, I saw something, not a vision, not a hallucination, a shape, a truth. Maybe in that truth, I ceased to be me as you understand it, not metaphorically, structurally. My mind changed shape. Certain doors opened, some closed forever. Mainstream historical fact. The late 1980s saw a brief surge of interest in something called quantum consciousness theories, that consciousness itself might be a quantum field, existing outside the brain and time. Fringe then. Still fringe now. But guess what? Marin was funding one of the research labs, quietly behind the scenes. Fringe. Tidbit. One of those researchers later disappeared after claiming they had developed a consciousness echo chamber, a device to capture thought patterns the way a camera captures light. Guess who bought that prototype? Marin. Back to the tape. I spent years trying to undo what I saw, to unknow it. It didn't work. So, I made the only choice that made sense. I decided to leave not just the world, but the pattern of myself. I split my narrative. Hid versions. Hid echoes. You've seen them. There's a pause. A soft shuffle. The installations. The books. The scents. They're not souvenirs. They're anchors. Memory weights. Holding parts of me in place. Because the full version, the whole Marin, can't survive in this reality anymore. You stop breathing. If you want to find me, really find me, you have to stop looking where I've been. That version of me is gone. Instead, look for the version you haven't met yet. Silence, then a click, then the ocean again. He's gone. You sit there for a long time, and then, slowly, you realize you're not alone. Because the box, it came with a return label. And the address, you won't believe this, but it's true. It's the address of your own childhood home, down to the house number, even the zip code. What does that mean? You think you know, but you don't want to admit it. Yet, historians still argue whether Marinville truly disappeared or simply passed the torch of disorientation to someone else, whether he became a myth or created one to live through others. And maybe that's the point, because now you have the photos, the voice, the scent of the past clinging to the inside of your lungs, and a choice. Do you send the box onward? Do you become the next echo? That's what he built. After all, a self-replicating puzzle, a narrative virus, something that doesn't just disappear. It spreads, and now it's touched you. You remember the spiral, and just before the lights flicker, and they do flicker, you remember what Marin said, to know where I've gone. You must forget where I've been, which means where you're going next won't be found on any map. And you still haven't seen the final photo tucked in the lining of the box. Not yet, but we'll get to that. After all, there's still one person left to meet, and she's been waiting. The photo slips free, like it's been waiting for this moment. You didn't notice it earlier. Folded between the box's lining and base, tucked so tightly it might have stayed hidden forever. But here it is, cool against your fingers, slightly warped with age. And it's her. The woman from Polaroid number 5, only this time. She's not in profile. She's facing forward, directly into the lens, directly at you. Her eyes are still smiling in that strange way, but now there's something else, a knowing. Like she understands you're looking at this photo right now. Years or decades later, on the back, in faint graphite, S.D. Keepers don't speak, they remember. So D. 2 letters that, if you dig deep enough, you've seen before. In Vell's early notes, on obscure patents, as the attribution on a sculpture in an underground Paris exhibit, he funded, under a pseudonym, Silence Dances, always those 2 letters. She wasn't just part of his world, she was part of the mechanism. But to understand her and what role she plays in Marin's vanishing, you need to go back further than any glossy magazine article or Forbes profile. You need to go to where it started. Remember how we mentioned Marin's parents, the elusive artists, the ones who raised him in that fortress-like villa in Tuscany. They weren't just artists. They were part of a closed-circle society of experimental thinkers, mystics, and sensory researchers, a crossbreed of Burning Man and the Bauhaus movement. Most people have never heard of them. Those who have call them the reversists. Their core belief, that reality, if observed with the right tools and forgotten in the right sequence, could be altered, not just interpreted, but restructured. SD was one of them. In fact, she was one of the founders, and she raised Marin, not biologically, but with a presence so consistent, so embedded in his childhood, that in many of his earliest journals, he simply calls her my first mind. And then one day, she vanished. Years later, Marin would recreate her voice in one of his installations using dozens of layered speaker systems and subaudible tones. Guests described hearing phrases only they could understand. It felt like someone remembered my dreams, one visitor said, but you don't have to imagine her voice. Because the next thing in the box isn't a photo or a tape. It's a black USB stick. No logo. Just a white spiral sticker. Plug it in. And don't ask how this all still works. Just go with it. And the file opens. One recording. No title. Her voice. Older than in the photo. Measured. Smoky. Like a violin left playing in a winter hall. If you're hearing this, Marin is gone. Or at least, the Marin you knew. That's what he wanted. Not to escape, but to become illegible. To slip between the lines of his own story. She pauses. A breath. We trained him well. Too well. He learned how to edit reality. Not with machines. With memory. With suggestion. With subtraction. Every version of himself you've found. Those were curated shadows. And now you stand in the echo chamber. That term again. Echo chamber. It keeps appearing. My name doesn't matter anymore. I've become what Marin called a keeper. One who holds the final thread of his pattern. And if you've reached this point, it might mean you are next. You flinch. But it makes sense, doesn't it? Why else would the box be sent to you? Why else would the story continue unfolding only as you move through it. This isn't passive, it's participatory. It needs a reader, a witness, because Marin didn't just write his final sentence for himself. He wrote it for the one who came after. You. She goes on. The final installation isn't a place. It's a moment. It hasn't happened yet. But when it does, you'll know. Something will slip. Time will fold. A scent you've never smelled will feel familiar. And then you must choose. And that's it. The audio ends. No signature, no location. Just silence. You sit back, shaken but activated. The historical debate still rages over whether Vell's final act was art, madness, philosophy, or something stranger, perhaps even preparation for a paradigm shift we haven't named yet. But you're starting to feel it now, that something is building, emotionally. You're not sure if it's awe or dread, probably both. You try to recall the last time a story made you feel this way, not just entertained, but altered, not just curious, but watched. And now there's a new question spiraling in your chest. If SD is a keeper, what does that make you? You flip the photo over again. There's something beneath the graphite, pressed deep into the paper like a bruise, a phone number. You hesitate, but of course you call it. It rings once, twice, a third time. Then a voice answers. Male, calm, not Marin, but someone who knows him. You're early, the voice says, but that's fine. He left one more piece for you. You'll find it where the train tracks cross the salt. That's not a metaphor. It's a location, and you know it. It's a place from your past, a memory you haven't thought about in years. And suddenly you understand what Marin meant. This isn't about him. It's about the shape your mind takes when you try to find him. And if you're ready, the final version of the story is waiting, still curled at the edges, still whispering your name. But you'll need to go somewhere dark, somewhere quiet, because the sentence wasn't just left behind. It's still happening, and the only way to read it is to disappear just a little bit yourself. The train tracks curve like a scar across the salt flats, etched into the landscape as if by a hand too steady to be human. You know this place. You haven't thought of it in years. But the minute you step from your car and the wind hits your face dry, mineral sharp, like the inside of an old ceramic jar you remember. You were 7, maybe 8, a picnic, a forgotten cooler, and a game of tag that ended with you tumbling down the embankment and landing right here. At the crossing, you scraped your knee on the gravel, and your mother laughed in that way mothers laugh when they're scared but don't want to show it. But there's something else. Back then, you saw someone standing just beyond the tracks, not an adult, not quite a child, watching. And then they were gone. You told yourself for years it was your imagination. Now you're not so sure, because waiting on the wooden tie, right where your knee bled all those years ago, is an envelope, yellowed, weighted down with a stone. Of course, inside one sheet of paper, typed. The font is slightly misaligned, like it came from a mechanical typewriter, one of those old Selectrics with the satisfying clack that once filled Marin's office like a heartbeat. You unfold the page. No greeting. Just this. To disappear properly, you must first untangle the idea of yourself. Not your name, not your face. The shape your mind makes when it thinks no one is watching. That shape is the doorway. You sit. Not because you're tired, but because you feel watched again, and sitting feels like a way to reassert control. The salt around you crunches softly as you shift. It smells faintly like copper, like blood. You read on. The final sentence was never about ending the story. It was about puncturing the illusion that stories have clean endings. Life doesn't. Consciousness doesn't. So neither should I. Emotion creeps up now. Nostalgia. No, that's too tame. It's something more jagged. Longing. Maybe. Or grief. But not for Marin. For yourself. For the version of you that used to believe mysteries had solutions. That belief, it's gone now. Like steam off a winter window. Remember your required historical fact. Here's a relevant one. In 1960, physicist Eugene Wigner proposed that consciousness causes collapse in quantum mechanics, that reality only resolves when observed. It's still hotly debated. The observer effect. And you can't help but wonder, was Marin trying to remove the observer? To see reality as it exists, before it's pinned down. You notice something strange. The letter doesn't end with a period, just a long dash, as if you're supposed to finish the sentence, or maybe not finish it at all, just inhabit it. You look up, and now you see her. Across the tracks, SD. She hasn't aged a day, or maybe she's aged in ways you can't track. Her presence feels outside time. The way certain lullabies or smells are, she beckons. You stand. Your legs feel numb, but you cross. She doesn't speak. Not yet. Instead, she hands you an object, a pendant, shaped like the spiral, lighter than it looks, made of something warm to the touch. Organic, you don't know. But as soon as you hold it, memories rise, like steam, your childhood room. The smell of graphite and wood glue. Your favorite teacher's handwriting. The first time you saw snow. These are your anchors now. She finally speaks. He didn't vanish. He nested, like Russian dolls. Layers of self, layers of meaning. This is the final one. And she gestures to the field behind her. You expect something grand, but it's a door. Just a wooden door frame. Freestanding in the salt. No wall. No hinges. A frame. You walk toward it. Each step feels both heavier and lighter. Like you're shedding weight, but also memory. The crunch beneath your feet sounds more distant now. SD calls after you. When you step through, you won't remember this version of yourself. That's the trade. But you'll remember something, enough to know it was real. You stop, look back, but she's already fading. Not dissolving, just softening. And then you do it. You step through. Nothing dramatic happens. No blinding light, no wind tunnel, no soundtrack. But the air changes. It smells of ozone and cedar. Like the moment before a thunderstorm, you feel a low vibration under your skin. Pleasant, not painful. Like the bass of a song you forgot you loved. You're somewhere else. A room. Wood floors. One window. A table. And on that table, a single sheet of paper, typed, same machine. But this time, it reads, "You found me," and beneath it, the sentence, "to vanish entirely." One must become unforgettable in pieces. Suddenly, it all makes sense. The installations, the layered clues, the tape, the spiral. He didn't want to disappear. He wanted to become multi-present. To exist not as a man, but a sensation, a shadow in a story you retell, a presence in a dream that leaves you asking questions in the morning. Historians still argue whether Marin Vell escaped death or simply traded in his body for memory. But now you understand. He didn't leave behind a legacy. He became one. You reach for the final photo. There's only one thing on the back, a mirror. Not metaphorical, an actual miniature mirror, glued to the surface, and you see your reflection. But it isn't just you. It's you. And something behind you, smiling. And then just as your breath catches in your throat, it's gone. The light in the room shifts. The paper curls. The sentence remains. And you finally know what it means to be part of something that doesn't end. It's hard to say how long you sit there. The light doesn't shift like it should. There's no clear source, just a soft, ambient glow, as if the room itself hums with memory. Not electricity, not heat, memory. And you're inside it now. It dawns on you slowly. With a mix of wonder and unease, this room isn't real in the normal sense. It's a holding space, a pocket stitched into the fabric of your mind, of someone's mind. Maybe Marin's, maybe yours. At this point, does it matter? The mirror still lies on the table, warm from your touch. And as you trace its edge with your finger, you recall something Marin once said in an interview. Years ago, buried in a question about virtual spaces and artistic legacy. When my body dies, my sentence will keep running somewhere. In someone. I don't need a grave. I need a reader. You didn't think much of it then. Now it rattles like a bell inside your ribs. The chair beneath you creaks faintly, grounding you. A real sound in an unreal place. You take a breath long, slow, measured. The air is still cedar sweet, like an old forest, dreaming of rain. And then there's a knock. You hesitate. There's no door. Remember, just the frame. But the knock came from beyond the walls, or rather, where walls would be. If this place had them, you follow the sound. Step through the empty frame again. Back into the salt, no, into something else. You're in a city now. Dusk blue. All angles, an echo. You recognize it not because you've been here, but because Marin described it once in a journal. A city that exists only in the hours between 2 Munras and 3 Sularis a.m. The interval city, he called it, populated by versions of ourselves that never quite arrived in waking life. You walk past flickering windows. One shows you. Older, another. Younger, another. Crying at a train station you've never visited, but somehow remember. This is where the final pieces hide. Because you're not just witnessing Marin's disappearance. You're enacting it. Each step, each recollection, each emotional twitch that's part of the performance. He constructed a narrative that required someone else to live it to completion. Remember the phrase from SD's message. The final installation isn't a place. It's a moment. This is it. And the moment breaks. You blink. And now you're sitting at a cafe table, Paris, or a simulation of it. Before you sits a man. He's older, grayer, thinner than Marin used to be. But the eyes, same as the photo, same as the spiral, same as the idea that's been chasing you for hours, or is it years? He sips coffee, nods once. You found the sentence. He says, so now you need the silence. You don't speak, can't, but he smiles. Words finish things. Silence holds them. That's the real trick. Becoming part of someone else's thinking. Not their memory. Memory fades, but thought that lingers. It infects. His voice is warm, familiar, like a favorite song. Played backward and still somehow recognizable. You feel a tug behind your ribs, beneath your skull, and suddenly you're crying. Not loudly, not out of sadness, but like a pressure valve has been opened, like something too heavy to hold is finally floating free. Marin stands. This is where I leave you, or maybe where you leave me. Depends how you draw the line. He touches your shoulder and vanishes, not like a trick, like a memory completing itself. And now you're alone. Except, not really. You're full of him, of the spiral, of SD, of the letter and the Polaroids, and the crackling audio. You look down at your hands. They're holding something new, a pen and a sheet of paper, blank. But you know what it's for. You're not supposed to solve the story. You're supposed to continue it. You sit. You write one sentence. And stop. The ink is still wet when you tuck it back into the envelope. You rise and walk out of the cafe into a morning that tastes like possibility and sea air. You don't know where you are, but you know exactly what to do because the story hasn't ended. It's just handed off, and you're the next keeper now. Let's slow everything down now. Let your breath settle. Let the images melt like warm wax Polaroids curling at the edges. Letters folding gently in a breeze that only you can feel. The salt flats. The city of echoes. The spiral. All drifting back into the folds of your mind. Where stories sleep until someone stirs them awake again. This was never really about Marin, was it? Not entirely. It was about you. The way you trace mysteries in the dark. The way you feel when a story slips just beyond your grasp. The way your heart softens at an unanswered question. Some say we disappear when we're forgotten. But maybe, just maybe, we disappear when the last sentence is written. So we keep a few unwritten. We leave the ending open. We choose to remain a little mysterious, a little unfinished. That's the beauty of bedtime stories like this one. They don't ask for resolution. They ask for resonance. And if you felt even a flicker of that resonance tonight, well, you're not alone. Take one last deep breath. Let the quiet wrap around you like an old coat. Heavy, safe, familiar. Feel the weight of the spiral in your pocket. Not real, maybe, but real enough. And when you dream tonight, perhaps you'll find yourself in that strange city, or walking a path made of salt and sound, or writing your own sentence in a language only you understand. And when you wake, carry it gently, because stories like this don't end. They echo. And you, yes. You are now part of the pattern. Sleep well, keeper. Sweet dreams.